welcome everyone to the Pablo J series. My real pleasure to introduce Pablo Boczkowski. It's a great pleasure because I've known Pablo for almost my entire professional career. We started our first job together on the same day at the same institution, and it has been just a wonderful experience to follow his career and our families together over the last couple of decades. It's been just a wonderful thing. And so to have him here today to talk about his new book, Abundance, which builds on a stack of other books, only 3 of which I could manage to carry down the stairs, all of which have become classics in our field very quickly. And this is particular favorites, news. So now Pablo is the Hamad bin Khalifa Al-Thani professor in the Department of Communication Studies at Northwestern. He's founder and director of the Center for Latinx Digital Media at Northwestern, and co-founder and co-director of the Center for the Study of Media and Society in Argentina, which is a joint initiative between Northwestern and the Universidad Andrés in Buenos Aires. And in 2020, he was named a fellow of the Universidad. His research program examines the dynamics of digital culture from a comparative perspective. Author of 6 books, it feels like more, 4 edited volumes, and over 50 journal articles. Pablo?
Thank you very much, Steve. Here, am I okay with cameras? Yes. Yes, okay. It's really a pleasure to be here. Keith and I have been really good friends for over 2 decades. We've asked, a special twist to this visit, so it's wonderful to visit SU for the first time under these circumstances. It's my first in-person talk, in the past couple of years out of my own university. And I'm very much looking forward to engaging in a conversation with you. So I want to thank everybody for attending here and also virtually. So I'm going to be talking today about Abundance, my newest book, and by far my most Argentine book. And it is a book about the world of science fiction that we live in, a world in which, for instance, we can be here and also we can be anywhere in the world interacting through the abundance of technologies and information that we have access to. Let me flip this. Don't worry about it. So we are not the first society in history that has confronted a massive upsurge in the volume of information available. In ancient Rome, that was also the case. And we had, as we have today, we had back then a debate about whether it was good or bad. Seneca was taking the position of the social dilemma that the abundance of book back then was a complete distraction, and Pliny the Elder argued the opposite. Having said that, they did not confront the kind of volume of information that we have now. 25 billion at the top is the number of smartphones that were sold in the world between 1998 and 2019. That is more than 3 smartphones per inhabitant of our planet Earth, which is 7.8 billion people currently living here. 4.5 billion, almost 4.5 billion, is the number of people who, as of the beginning of this year, were on at least one social media platform. Right? That is more than half of the world's population, and if you exclude from the calculation newborns or people who are very old and cannot manage the technology, people who live in parts of the world where they don't have access to infrastructure, we are probably encountering 2/3 of the world with access to social media. The average social media user is on 6.6 platforms, so that tells you a little bit about how much we connect to social media, how much it means to us. Almost 100,000 is the number of entries that I got within a fraction of a second when I did a keyword search on CNN.com with the words Donald Trump in October 2020. 2019. And it would have taken me, if I did a keyword search with the then sitting US president or the then sitting Argentine president when I was growing up in Buenos Aires, in the National Library complex, beautiful building on Avenida Libertador, it would have taken maybe years to get 100,000 entries on any sitting president back then. Now, one news site, matter of seconds, I can spend my entire life reading about Al-Thani. I don't know why I would do that, but if I wanted, I certainly could. And 14,000, give or take, I rounded things up, is the number of titles on the Netflix catalog earlier this year worldwide. Of course, because of intellectual property rights in different countries, it's only a fraction of that collection that is available. In the US, it's north of 5,000. In Argentina, it's around 3,500. Many of these titles, as you know, are shows, TV shows. So one title is many seasons and many episodes per season. So this is just one streaming platform. If you include all streaming platforms available, it is more than 100,000 titles, available worldwide. I could spend the rest of my life just watching shows on Netflix, sleeping and eating. So there's a lot of information available to us. It's not the first time in history, it's not the first time in modern history, which is why the behavioral and the social sciences have already studied this phenomenon profusely, and they have done that usually under the banner of the notion of information overload. In the social sciences, not thematized as such, but probably the starting point is Siemens' work at the turn of the century in the transition from agrarian to urban environments, and in the behavioral sciences, probably the canonical text, one of my favorite texts, an incredible piece of rhetorical achievement in addition to the science, is George Miller's 1956 7 plus or minus 2, about how many units of information our brain can concurrently process. Underneath a lot of work across a number of social scientific and behavioral scientific disciplines, there is this idea of information overload that is sort of practically illustrated here. And the idea is that there is an optimum of information that is needed, right, to make a particular decision at a particular point in time, and that more than that optimum of information doesn't really add, is not neutral, it is detrimental. Right? It's a typical inverted U shape that you see in many other phenomena in the social world. And the idea, therefore, is that information overload characterizes a situation that is bad. That is why a lot of the research of information on information overload is a research that is associated with the discourse of deficit, that more information is not necessarily good, it's actually bad for society. Another series of assumptions that are related to this idea that have been common to the work on information overload across a number of disciplines is that the studies have focused on what I call instrumental uses of information that one needs to make a particular decision, usually in the workplace, right? Where one can certainly assume certain conditions of optimality, there are better and worse decisions, there is limited time, there is limited information. And therefore, a whole lot of the focus of the research has been on cognitive information processing. And a whole lot of the methodological apparatus have been mostly experimental or survey, usually from the perspective of the analyst, the ethic perspective. This is essentially what characterizes the research on information overload. And you might wonder, if I'm interested in living in a world with a lot of information, why don't I call the book Information Overload rather than Abundance? I call it Abundance because I believe that in order to make sense of living in the world with lots of shows on Netflix, many stories about Al-Thani, many more than the stories that we need, or certain stories that we need, at least, being connected to this all the time and being doom scrolling and being hooked on social media all the time, is not something that is exclusively, not even primarily related to the instrumental uses of information. It relates to the relational uses of information. This is having to do with entertainment. This is having to do with the management of everyday life. issues having to do with recreation, leisure, etc. And that's why, if we want to really understand what is the experience of living in this kind of world, we need to look not only at cognitive issues, but we need to look at what information means to people in terms of interpretation. We need to look at how this plethora of information is related to different emotional states and the kinds of routines and practices that we enact to deal with that. Because we deal with this information in many ways, in many settings, not only in the workplace, and that's why it's very difficult to have these assumptions of optimality. Right? Is it really the best use of my time to be until 2 in the morning replying to 700 messages that I get in WhatsApp groups? Or to spend, an afternoon locked in a hotel room watching the new season of Money Heist while on vacation, instead of enjoying Al-Thani. For those of you who follow Money Heist, Casa de Papel in Español, you probably understand the urge, September 3rd, when the first half of season 5 came out, to be locked in the hotel room to follow that. So is it good for me? Is it bad for me? It depends, really. It was really hot outside, and I didn't want to get sunburned. It was a great way of spending my time on vacation with AC. And that's why I propose that instead of a default discourse of deficit, we might as well adopt what I call a position of emergent evaluation. Now, whether having a lot of information is good or bad depends on the person and the circumstances that we are talking about. And in order to do that, we need to do that understanding things not only from the analyst's perspective, but also from the actor's perspective, from an A sample. So the questions that I want to answer in this book are three, subsumed under a general, phenomenological, if you wish, question of what is really the experience, right, of living in the world of science fiction that we live in today. I have three major questions that I want to answer. The first one is from a macro-sociological standpoint. What are the main structural variables that organize access to technology and use of technology and content? Okay. Number one. Within these broader structural variables, then the second question is, what are the meso, micro level cultural dynamics, mostly the kinds of routines that we enact and the meanings that we attribute to both the technology and the content options, and that shape this experience. And the third one is the so what. What does this mean for media, for politics, and for culture? As I said before, I didn't say before, so I'll say now. I have developed for the book a four-pronged approach to try to answer this question. Theoretically, I depart from Jim Carrey's own distinction between communication and transmission and the ritual view of communication. A whole lot of the cognitive work on information overload, derives and enacts, if you wish, the idea of communication and transmission, the movement of information point to point and the processing of that. I try to complement that with the ritual view of communication and understand that communication is about making meaning, it's about making meaning together and becoming a collective through that process. The second pillar of the approach is the understanding that if we really want to understand the experience of information overload, we need to do away a little bit with the division of labor that has characterized evolution and the growth of communication and media studies into subfields that rarely talk to one another. So we have the people who study the technology, infrastructure of communication, then we have the people who study the content side of communication. For those who study the content, we have people who do news and the people who do popular culture and entertainment. And they rarely talk to one another. They have over time, as part of the natural growth of scientific subfields, develop their own theories, their own languages, etc. But in reality, that's not how we as users live our information lives, in particular on these devices, where we are flipping screens, right, in ways that connect entertainment with social media content, with news, and that we are managing both hardware and software in order to get that. So people's information practices are much more integrated and messy that doesn't necessarily mean that our analytical tools have to be. But we need analytical tools that can capture the relationship across that. So what I try to do in the book is to combine scholarship from the different fields, and also that relates to the third pillar, which is the idea of trying to integrate the macrostructural approach with a meso-level cultural understanding that is mostly the focus of the book, but do not consider cultural divorce from the macro level structural trends. And even though the focus of the account is contemporary, I'm very mindful that this is not the first time in history where a society confronts a massive jump in the amount of information available. Hence, they start with antiquity, and in particular, close attention to the early modern period, the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, to see what really might be unique about the current situation and what might be a continuation or a reenactment of ways in which a collective response to this kind of change that we've seen before. And finally, the book is unabashedly Argentine. It's Argentine from the cover up. The cover reproduces the colors of the Argentine flag. As I was discussing yesterday with a friend, I've been in this country 27 years, and the longer I stay, the more Argentine I become. And as Michael Shelton said in his blurb of this book, this is a love letter to my home country. And the reason why I do that is epistemological, not only identitarian. It has to do with my identity, but there are a number of reasons why I think this is important. First and foremost, it is a political act. Most of the world does not live in the global north. Most of the world, 86 to 87% of the world live in countries that are not the countries where most of the scholarship gets produced and circulated, and in particular the scholarship on information overload, which has been done by far in countries of the global north. That doesn't necessarily justify a focus in the global south epistemologically, but what I argue in the book is that there are three reasons why Argentina provides a particularly fruitful national setting to explore the issues that I explore in the book and answer the questions that I pose. The first one is because Argentina, like a low middle income country, a country where at the time of the study that was conducted in 16 and 17, combination of interviews and surveys, at the time of the study had a third of the population living below levels of poverty. Levels of poverty at the time was $10 a day for a household of 4, okay? And only 2/3 of the country had lived above that level. Now, just to give you an idea, in Argentina, 6 out of 10 people below the age of 17, 6 out of 10 children live below the level of poverty. Right? And that's not even a poor country, it's a middle income country by World Bank standards. So relative to where most of the research has been conducted on issues of information overload and in general information technology and society, for people to afford a smartphone and be on WhatsApp, and 70% of the population are on WhatsApp, it really needs to mean a lot to them, right? To be connected to this world of information plenty. So a condition of relative or comparative more material scarcity can illuminate much more what it means to be connected to this world, right? Because it takes a significant portion of discretionary income, if there is any, if you are below the level of poverty, in order to connect. And that's why the book begins with an anecdote of a homeless, or a setting of a homeless couple, living on the streets, but nonetheless watching something, on their phone connected to free Wi-Fi. The second reason why Argentina, like many countries in Latin America, also Southeast Asia, I would argue parts of Africa, provides an interesting national setting for this study is because, as you know, a significant portion of the discussion of the role of information technology in society, this world of information abundance in the global north, in particular in the US, has been about whether these technologies are making us more lonely or not. Sharon Turco is probably the leading voice in this domain, but Barack Wellman has eloquently written about that. Other friends here have also written about that, which link. There's been a long debate about this, but a lot of this research has been conducted in contexts like here, where the associational cultures tend to be more individualistic, more instrumental, and more transactional. Argentina has had historically a very strong associational culture where community and familial bonds have played a very, very important role in everyday life. So provides an interesting setting to test whether this world of information abundance lead us to become more lonely, or maybe in a context with a different associational culture, we see different effects. And the third reason why Argentina provides a very interesting setting to examine this is because another topic that has been, over the past 5 years in particular, frequently associated with this world of information abundance, particularly since Brexit and the election of Donald Trump in 2016, is this idea that this information abundance is destroying the fabric of democracy, destroying the polity, etc., eroding trust, blah, blah, blah. As you know, global trends suggest that there is a sort of a global downturn in terms of trust in media and journalism. Our friends at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, University of Oxford, have provided quite conclusive evidence in this regard. Argentina, the Oxford surveys measures towards the bottom quintile. So what I have in the book is that it provides a little bit of avant-garde to what might happen in the world, in other parts, particularly the global north, Western Europe, Scandinavian countries, places where a lot of the research gets conducted, but which have a very different institutional infrastructure than many places like Argentina in the global south, where the institutions of the polity have usually not served many, significant portions of the population very well. So these are the three reasons why this book is very urgent and very self-aware of it being an Argentine book. A lot of the research on the global north adopts a view from nowhere. It's not only the idea that it's done in a particular place, but that place is a stand-in for all places, and we do not need to be reflexive about that. I am not claiming that Argentina is a stand-in for any other place, but I am in the book very self-aware and very reflexive of what might be the limitations and what might be some connections to what's happening in other parts of the world. So the book is structured into 6 chapters, an intro and an outro, and then 4 empirical chapters, 2 on the technologies, if you wish, of information abundance, and 2 on the content of information abundance. Chapter on screens is like the hardware of information abundance, and in particular looks at personal screens such as the smartphone, the computer, and the television set. Chapter 3 is all the software of information abundance, in particular platforms, focusing on the 5 most popular social media platforms in Argentina at the time of the study. WhatsApp, which I consider, because the subjects consider, a social media platform, not a private messaging service. WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. And then also when I address platforms, I address the kind of content that goes in social media platforms, including news and entertainment, but mostly the relational expressive content that you find there. And then 2 chapters on the 2 main kinds of content other than social media expressive content, news and entertainment. So today, to give you a little bit of a flavor of the book in the next 15 minutes or so, I will present an overview of the analysis about the news. So if we look at about 15 years worth of research on news consumption during the second half of the century, from Leo Bogart onwards, there are 3 main findings that are very robust in the literature that set a little bit the stage for what is going on now, to try to understand both continuities and discontinuities. The 3 findings are, number 1, that we know that there was and still is a very high degree of routinization in terms of how we get the news, both in when we do it, where we do it, so very predictable and temporal, predictable temporal and spatial patterns, the kinds of outputs that we use, the channels, etc. Second one is that this routinization was organized along fairly stable temporal and spatial parameters that, number 3, were tightly integrated into the rhythms and dynamics of everyday life. So, for instance, the prevalence, unfortunately, of patriarchal cultures and patriarchal practices in the household meant that men usually decided what to watch and where to watch in the evening news at home, right? And that was not necessarily related to the content of the news, is because everyday life was, and unfortunately still is in many places, organized around patriarchal culture. Underlying these ideas, there are two assumptions, so these findings, there are two assumptions that are unstated, usually in the literature, but very powerful. The first one is that information had to be obtained. That is, somebody had to go and buy a newspaper, subscribe to a newspaper, turn on the television. So it might seem very simple, but it's not necessarily obvious. The second one is that once that information was obtained, the routines, the practices that were enacted to consume that information were primary. Right? When my dad sat down at 7 a.m. in the kitchen table every morning, Monday to Friday, to read the newspaper, sipping his mate before going to work, right? He was focused on the newspaper, and that was it. The same with the evening newscast on TV. Radio in the workplace, for those who use it in the workplace, had a somewhat different flavor, but by and large, getting the news in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 80s was a primary task. So keeping that in mind, what is going on in Argentina currently? So first of all, Argentines are a very informed bunch. 97% of the people who replied to our in-person survey conducted in 2017 said that they got the news daily. Like the case in the States, despite the tremendous press that the digital has, it's a world of television, right? Same as in the States, same as in many countries. When you ask overall, all the sources of news, TV dominates the radio. When you ask main source of news, TV and radio win by a lot. The main challenger is the digital world with social edging websites. This is growing over time. This is staying stable. So the gap will close, but this is the picture now. And print is something of museum quality. None of the 700 people we surveyed said that the magazines are their primary source of news, and only 3% of 700 said newspapers. Okay. When they inform themselves, they do this in a highly routinized fashion, like what happened in the 20th century. They get the same sites or the same channels, they get them in the same every day, etc. And the older, unsurprisingly, the older you get, right, the more routinized your consumption is. Like everything in life, my children tell me. Now, unlike the 20th century, in the 21st century, we have a lot more information. 100,000 stories on Donald Trump on CNN, for Christ's sake. That information, in particular breaking news, circulates at lightning speed. And most of what's out there is a repetition of what somebody else has. That was the topic of my 2010 book, News at Work. So how is it that people consume information in this environment? What I claim in the book is that there are 5 mechanisms, cultural mechanisms, that mediate between the input, right, the kind of information that we have, the amount, and the output, our reception experience. Okay, there are 5 mediating factors. The first one is that the routines whereby people get the news today are not primary anymore. They are what I call derivative routines. That is, they get the news as a derivative result of doing something else. Sandra, which is a psychotherapist in Buenos Aires, as you know, Buenos Aires has an even higher per capita portion of psychotherapists than Midtown Manhattan, where the Upper West Side even. So we have a neighborhood called Villa Freud, right? I mean, it's like the Freudian neighborhood there. So we have several psychoanalysts and psychotherapists in our interview sample. She said that the last time she got the news before the interview, and that was the only question that was similar to all interviews, is We started by asking, what was the last time that you got the news, right? So Sandra said, while she was doing chores, waiting for a client to arrive in her home office, and that was a habitual practice. Norberto, who is her same age, 53, and a high school teacher, said, I was mowing the lawn when I was listening to a radio. I never sit down really to listen to a radio. I listen to a radio while I do something else. The same happens with social media. Juana, and these are all pseudonyms, by the way, that the interviewees chose. These are not their real names. Juana said that the last time that she got the news before the interview was when she was walking to the cafeteria in her college. She was on Twitter, and the minute she got to the cafeteria, she stopped getting the news because she was walking not to get the news, she was walking to get coffee. Right? And the same for Luciana, who saw a piece of news on Facebook, but she never is on Facebook primarily to get the news. People enact these derivative routines because they perceive that the news is ambient. It's not something that they need to actually go get. Now, through Alfred Hermida and other colleagues, we have developed this idea of ambient journalism on the production side. But what I'm signaling here is that not only that there is a lot of news out there, is that people's perception that there is a lot of news out there orients their practices as recipients, as consumers of news, not as journalists who are producing news. And because they think that, as Homero Gil de Zúñiga says, the news will find them, they will actually enact a series of practices that, for instance, Julian, who's a film producer, calls the spillover theory of the news. Anytime there is something happening, and they will find out on Facebook or on Twitter. Estefania, who's a clerical employee, says, everything is so immediate today that, for instance, many news, I don't even have to go to La Nación, which is our quality national newspaper, because on Twitter, when something happens on the other side of the world, you give a refresh and it comes to you. This not only applies to digital, right, which has been the focus of the ambient scholarship, it applies to television and to radio. Our surveys indicate, and the surveys of the Ministry of Culture in Argentina indicate a significant similarity in terms of the presence of television in the household, but as you know, in the Bureau of Labor Statistics surveys, the average that a TV is on in the household is 2.5 hours, and if you are a retiree, it's 4 hours. In Argentina, it's 3 hours. The average is more or less the same, but nobody pays attention. Because when you ask people say, I have the TV on, but it's just a waste of energy, a lifelong habit. I am not really paying attention to that. When they pay attention to the news, is the third mechanism, they perceive that the news is biased as the norm. Bias in the news is not the exception, it's the norm. It's within one standard deviation of the mean for them. They do not expect the news to be objective, impartial, unbiased. They expect the news to be biased, okay? And that is very, very important. Also, it comes in the survey research and it comes in the interviews. When we ask people to rate their level of agreement with the following phrase, the news media, so you can read, the news media of my country report the news independently of political powers, 2.5 more people said they disagree with this statement than they agree with the statement. When several questions down the survey, we switched political for economic, we got the same result. Right? Which is why people like Carla said, you cannot forget that the news has an intention, a connotation of either political partisanship or business reasons. If we think historically in the sociology of news, we know that big newspapers are at the top of the chain in terms of quality, objectivity, all of that, the sensationalism, yada, yada, yada. So in Argentina, it has been said the same. However, Carlos, a computer programmer, would tell you none of the Argentine newspapers seem to me objective enough to trust in the news. None. Because I had such a large sample of interviewees, almost 160, I had the good fortune of having about 12 to 14 people who had direct contact with the topic that was subsequently covered in the news, right? So I asked them, what they thought about the coverage. Not a single one of them was satisfied. And what they came up with as a result of that is what Carla, who lives in a very small town in the province of Santa Fe, it's a town of 8,000 people. Carla said, if these things happen in my small town, I can't imagine at the greater scale, everything is super manipulated. So what people do when they confront this is they have to deal with this. And so they have developed a series of routines. There are two that are quite prevalent. The first one, which has been shown to exist also in Southeast Asia, the work that our colleagues at LSE did on misinformation on WhatsApp, also in Nigeria and Kenya, our colleagues at the BBC did some work. There are in other parts of the world, it's this idea that when a news item is particularly of interest to people, then they listen to multiple sides, right? And try to find a middle ground. The other strategy that was quite common and was fascinating to me is, so imagine, if you think that the news is biased by default, you're going to trust the news site that is very clear about their intention. And you're going to distrust the news site that says that they pretend to be unbiased. So what people do is they tend to prefer sites, right, or news, or newspapers or television that tell them this is our stance and this is our report, right? Even if they disagree with them ideologically. And then, like in a game of golf, where you have a handicap, so you sort of discount, the number of I think strikes or whatever. I don't play golf, but I know that's what handicap does. So people apply sort of handicap theory to the news. So I know this side is conservative. So they are adding a conservative slant. I'm going to take it 4 notches down, right? And I'm going to mix that with my social media feed, which is more liberal. And as a result of that, I'm going to be able to approximate to a certain degree reality, the truth. Because for Argentines, the truth is a puzzle that they have to resolve. And part of the joy of getting the news, the little time that they get joy, is to try to solve this puzzle. However, for the most part, when they get exposed to the news, they hate. They actually viscerally hate the content because the content makes them feel like S ... Sophia, who worked as an administrative assistant, said, today I read on the Facebook page of Todo Noticias is a local news channel, that somebody had found a newborn within a garbage bag. Why? What is the need to publish that story? They're all bad news. There isn't a single good one. It's pure angst, pura angustia. It's a very psychoanalyzed bunch, so angst is part of our vernacular. So the problem with this is that once you have this kind of affect, you don't want to be connected. Who wants to be in touch with something that provokes a lot of angst? Right? So Marta, who's 60 and makes a living cleaning houses, said, there is much news that makes you feel badly, so I prefer not to see them. Which is why, this is the 5th mechanism, there is almost no attachment to the news. So in the book, one of the concepts, one of the issues that I explore empirically is how much we can't detach from this world of information, how much we can't detach from this, from social media, from Money Heist, or whichever your favorite show is. Ted Lasso for me these days. So I watch every Friday patiently for the new episode. Today is the new season. I have to watch it. It's the new episode, last one of season 2. And there is a lot of attachment to this, right? I can't part ways only when I go to church, but when the priest stops speaking, I sneak and I look, and I leave it, on the side when I go to see my shrink, but in the elevator, I'm looking at it. Same with binge watching, same with doom scrolling, no attachment to it. 144 is the number of seconds that the average visit to a top 50 digital news site in the state lasts, the entire visit, not one story. It has been very stable, according to Pew, over the past many years. 150 is the minutes, not seconds, minutes, that the average Netflix, the median Netflix user spends, right, during the first week of the release of a new season of their favorite thriller. 22 episodes last 5 days. I went over 5 episodes of Casa de Papel in 24 hours while on vacation, not even at work. When season 3 showed up, Dan, Chris, and I were in Berlin at the Weizmann Institute, and I turned Dan into our esteemed colleague at the University of North Carolina into this show. So when the season was released, I told Dan and folks in the office, I'm not leaving my apartment, I'm watching the entire season, and then you see me in 2 days in the office. So it turns out, if you put together this entire 5 cultural mechanisms, that the news is everywhere, 100,000 stories on Donald Trump, for Christ's sake. But experientially, we have devalued. The way Argentines have devalued our currency historically, we now have devalued the news we consume. It's not that we say the news is bad or that it doesn't mean to us, it's what we do with it, right? Myself included, except for football news. I'm sorry, the proper football, not the football that you use with your hands, like in the States. So why? Like, why has this happened? In the book, what I do to try to account for this is to contrast, playing a little bit of Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, to contrast chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4, what I presented, which I subsume under this notion of the poverty of facts, with the incredible revaluation that we have given collectively, at least we Argentines, to the world of entertainment, which I subsume under the wealth of fictions. I don't have time to go over the empirical evidence. I have to provide more information later on, but to contrast, the derivative routines that we enact for news are very different from watching Game of Thrones or watching Money Heist obsessively over it. And even if I do screen share or second screening, WhatsApping my friends about what's happening is still the primary focus of my attention. In both cases, there is a clear perception of ambience and a series of practices enacted to deal with that. The after is markedly different. Even the devotees of the horror genre, which I had several in my interview sample, content that makes them cringe, gives them stomach upset and nightmares for nights, love it. And the joy that they have when they talk about it is very different from the affect when they talk about news. Because fiction doesn't pretend to portray reality, there is no distrust associated with it, and there is growing level of attachment, as all of us have seen with streaming services, in particular during the pandemic. Why? Could it be because, an economic sort of explanation, there is a lot more content, so every single piece of content gets devalued. If that was the case, it wouldn't apply to entertainment. Which is why it's interesting to put news next to entertainment and to contrast that. Could it be a technological reason? Not really. I mean, these are the best technologies in history. And even for going to the movie theater, because it's long predates COVID, even for going to the movie theater, we have the best quality of film out there. Since Netflix went from sending us DVDs to streaming, box office revenues adjusted by inflation in North America, US, and Canada in a 10-year period went down 25%. The technology for watching films, amazing, but we don't do it, right? Could it be because the content is bad? Not really. We have the best journalism in history, by and large. Multimedia storytelling, data journalism at the high end, freely available. It's incredible. So why? Given that it's not about economics, it's not about the quality of content, it's not about technology, it's because of the character of everyday life. It is because of a series of cultural dynamics that have nothing to do with media, primarily, that have to do with our associational cultures, the way we live in the world, that generates a series of expectations, a series of interpretations, a series of practices that end up folding news consumption into them and devaluing news in our daily lives. So what then? So first of all, in terms of the heuristics that we use to understand media and communication phenomena, the field is a field that has grown up around the importance of media and communication. So a lot of our explanations are media-centric. Now, folks like Dave Morley primarily, and then after Nick Coolidge, Sean Moore, Sarah Pink, etc., have been insisting for now 15 years or so that we need to decenter our explanations. And a whole lot of what we do with the media do not have to do primarily with the media, but with the way the media is ingrained in much broader patterns of everyday life. So the heuristics that we apply to understand the media have to take that into account. This kind of work also, by integrating news with popular culture, technology with content, signals the importance of this kind of bridging epistemological work to combat the problems of intellectual fragmentation that my colleague, dear friend, and compatriot, Xavier Weisbord, argued in his 2019 communication post-discipline. And that, I argue, should invite us to rethink some of the key concepts in the field, agenda setting, etc., that are premised on the idea that people really value the news, but people don't. Sorry to tell you, at least Argentines, I don't want to generalize. At least some Argentines, 70% or so. Right? If we don't experientially value that content, do we really think that the media set the agenda? And more general, in terms of the cultural and political implications, as we all know, the news is a key institution of modernity. It's not the only one, however. And like many other institutions of modernity, law, medicine, etc., is going through a major crisis in their appeal and in their cultural authority. And so we really need to examine, the basis of this and really rethink, I argue in the book, how we approach this as part of a much larger pattern of historical change. So just give you one data point before I go into my last slide. I talked about the historical contextualization of this. There is a wonderful, really amazing historian at Harvard, Anne Blair, who wrote probably the best book on the history of information overload from the early modern period to the Renaissance. And what she argues in the book is that, the information explosion in the 13th century and then the one in the Renaissance was not necessarily an artifact of technological change. It's not, print revolution in particular in the 15th century. She said before that there was a cultural transformation that she calls an information lust that developed in the 13th century, in that case for the wonders of the natural world, that led, significant production of manuscripts first and then print, right? And that anteceded the technological transformation. That cultural change and what happened there was a lust for information about the natural world that expanded the number of texts that were made available to the public, but maintained a strong distinction between the elites producing information and the masses consuming it. There was more information for the masses, more members of the elite, but that happened. What I argue in the book is that the main transformation culturally for the current time, has to do that the information that we last today is not about the natural world, and it's not coming from experts, it's coming from all of us. And now we yearn for information about the common person. And we yearn for information about the most mundane details of everyday life. We are incredibly used to seeing pictures of food on Instagram. Imagine, put yourselves in the shoes of somebody living or growing up. I was born in 1965, growing up in the early 70s. If you told me that people will be spending hours of their day and making money out of posting what they eat for lunch, I think crazy, right? Okay? That is a tremendous cultural transformation that was in part ushered by reality television in this country that prepared culturally the ground for that. And then social media has essentially amplified this. But what we are seeing is a massive cultural transformation. And if you think about Donald Trump as a political leader, he pretended to be like the common person, not the first, illiberal politician to do that in history, but with a particularly significant force. So we find ourselves in this situation. This is my compatriot, greatest footballer on earth. I don't know if there are many Portuguese here, fans of his nemesis Cristiano Ronaldo, but I will argue, without scientific evidence, that Lionel Messi, Leo, or Leo as we call him, is the greatest footballer on earth at the moment. He played all his entire career since he was very, very young for Barcelona Football Club and was transferred to Paris Saint-Germain. This is both in his own Instagram about his first goal that he scored for Paris Saint-Germain about 10 days ago in the victory in the Champions League, I believe it was again. It was 5 pictures. This post, after a couple of days, had almost 14 million likes. Not exposures, likes. Somebody had to engage with that content. I did an analysis of engagement on the New York Times Instagram feed. So you know, Instagram is the future for journalism. Right? Twitter is a niche platform. Facebook is dying. Right? Not Facebook the company, it's an Instagram. It would take more than 200 posts by the New York Times, the world's paper of record in the English-speaking language, to score a goal against Messi, essentially to tie the game. Okay? Do we really think that the media set the agenda in a world in which one goal equals more than 200 stories by the most powerful news organization in the world? We need to rethink the field from the ground up. We need to understand where people are and develop concepts without throwing what we know out of the window, but really develop concepts for the world in which we are today, in which one goal, completely inconsequential. The match was already 1-0 and then 2-0. And it's a normal match, in the first stage of the Champions League. Who cares? One goal, 200 some stories. The media really sets the champions? Thank you.
Pablo, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And so we have time for questions. I've also asked anybody online if they have questions, and so I'll take them as I can, but since I invited you, I'm going to ask the first one. Okay, go ahead. So like I said, I really love reading this book. I told you before, I mean, if you haven't bought this book yet, it is just beautiful to read. And so I really highly recommend it. And so some of the things I really like about this story, I love that you don't neglect old media, old media is still the dominant media in many ways in your story, and how it's integrated into everyday practices, and how you integrate platforms with even like the city and online and offline interaction is just really important and so neglected in the work we do so often. I mean, we often tend to treat social media as a separate island by itself. I mean, right now we're listening to Congress where Facebook suddenly is Instagram is the first time we've worried about body image apparently. It's the only media we use. So to hear this story is really important, and the framework you provide.
Thank you.
So in reading the book, I could not help but channel my inner cats and ask you, where are the opinion leaders?
You have one here.
So is that true though? I mean, he's a stranger to me. Is this the future of opinion leadership?
So it's a very interesting book. It's a very interesting question. Sorry. So there are still, presidents, elected officials. There's still opinion leaders, but they are competing for them in the market of attention in ways that were not competing before, and they are largely losing. So continue with the world of soccer. I continue with a very happy moment for us Argentine. I'm sorry, we have two Brazilians, at least two Brazilians in the audience. So Argentina is the most beautiful country in the world. But this summer, in the Northern Hemisphere, winter in the Southern Hemisphere, Argentina defeated Brazil in the final of Copa America in the Estadio Maracanã, 1-0. Sorry, very good for us though. So it was like, it was the event of the year for Argentines. It was very common for television they had a lot of people in the, experts, right, opinion leaders in the studio, etc. They would essentially broadcast the live Instagram feed from the players in the dressing room. And then a video of that by Kun Agüero, who's an incredible striker in the Premier League, retiring striker, that had 1 hour, unedited, terrible quality, etc., had 10 million views. Right? Which professional news organization gets 10 million views on Instagram? So this is not to say that journalists do not hold influence. This is not to say that the traditional elites hold influence, but it's a world in which the common person or the sources have a direct access to the communication environment and become opinion leaders in ways that they were not opinion leaders before. And what that does is that it disrupts traditional modes of governance of modernity. So the media was very important during the modern era, which, as you know, I'm dating as something that has passed. Even late modernity, one could argue, because they organized political discourse and battles of the polity for the citizen. Right? That gave the media the agenda-setting power. Now, in a situation in which, as we said, it's not that the publics have amplified like in the Renaissance. It is that there are many more sources of information, and we have culturally come to value the common person sometimes much more than the experts. Then opinion leadership gets much more fragmented and much more difficult to govern. Right? So we see this in the COVID public health communication process, where the opinions of the experts, right, get sort of taken into account together with the stuff that you get on YouTube, the stuff that your neighbor tells you, in ways that it was not getting before. It's not uncommon now. Before you go to the doctor, you Google stuff, you watch videos, and essentially we go watch certain videos more than others because they have a lot of views, not necessarily because they come from experts, right? So it must be good. So opinion leadership has become much more fractal, right? And is increasingly moving out of the hands of the elite and creating all kinds of problems for policy, right? And for governance in societies that are much more unpredictable than before. We see that in polls for elections, right? We see manifestations of this, I think, unpredictability in many different places, and it's part of this. And the transformation, I insist, is not technological. Transformation is cultural. We have come to value a picture of my avocado toast on Instagram, sometimes much more than an important news story. I mean, I don't do avocado toast and I don't post those pictures anyway, but my oldest daughter does, and she has followers for that. So it's very interesting if you imagine it from the ground up, and it has to do with, I'll say one more thing about that, the role of experience in information processing. We have done a project on the reception of misinformation in Argentina in the national elections of 2019. And it's very interesting the extent to which personal experience is used as a framework for the analysis of expert information. As in, I don't trust the news anymore because my wife cheated on me and we got a divorce. Since then, I don't trust anything. That's a culture. I mean, for somebody to say that, not only to do it, but to say in an interview, that's a cultural shift about the role of the experts. Yes.
Pablo, excellent presentation, and of course, very provocative as
on purpose,
making us think about what is going to be the next steps that we need to figure it out in this area. I wonder if you consider that in 2015, there was a presidential election in Argentina. And 2015 is when Donald Trump launched his announcement for going into the presidential election. One of the pieces in his platform was to attack systematically the news media, the press, and to discredit the media. And I know, I have read a couple of reports from what happened in Argentina during the elections there. Also, they were trying to follow a little bit of what Trump was doing, which is discredit discredit some of the sources. Now, question: do you think that now in 2000?
Can I go on the web? Can you? Well, sorry, I'm going to answer your question with a news story. Can I?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Do you think that the attacks of public figures that capitalize in political ideology has damaged so much the reputation of the news media and the press that is really, really hard to make him come back to the lack of credibility?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I'm going to answer it from the vantage point of the one country that I've been studying. I cannot generalize that. It's very interesting that you mentioned the 2015 election. It was quite momentous. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Can you?
It's right there.
Bigger? Okay. So, in the case of Argentina, in the case of many countries in Latin America, the direct discursive attacks on the press have mostly, from the highest office and systematic as a political strategy, thank you so much, have a direct antecedent, and first probably antecedent in the administration of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez in Venezuela was advised by actually an Argentine political scientist, and Marxist there, who said, the political party system is sort of weak. But if you attack the press consistently, it's a social institution, and you turn them into your enemy, it's going to boost your standing. That is a tactic that worked well for Chavez, and it was replicated by many leaders of the same political persuasion, Álvaro Correa, Evo Morales, and the former late president of Argentina, Néstor Kirchner, and his wife who succeeded him, Cristina Fernández. So the reason why it works in Latin American countries in part is because it builds on a much longer history of collusion of the press with both military regimes and with economic powers. So it's been long discredited historically, and so political leaders strategically use this, because it boosts them. And of course, every inch that you do this, the more it erodes the political basis of that. Now, the case of the 2015 election in Argentina that is very interesting, this one. Mauricio Macri, who was president from 2015 to 2019, was a scion of an industrialist whose main claim of fame before going into politics was being president of Boca Juniors, a top football club. Again, the football that you play with your feet, not the one with your hand. And after that, he ran for mayor of Buenos Aires office, was elected, then he's re-elected, and in 2013, he's re-elected in 2011. 2013, he decides to go become president. Mauricio Macri has a problem. He's very well known through soccer, and he's very well known in Buenos Aires, but not in the rest of the country. So he puts together a team, and this article details the story of that. He puts together a team to try to make him president. And the communication strategy was as follows. So, that don't have the same amount of money as the incumbent, right? They control the state apparatus, and I'm not super well known, but I have social media. So I'm going to steal a page from the Jimmy Carter playbook, and I'm going to go and travel from town to town and visit one family a day, and I'm going to put it on Facebook. Okay? And I'm going to post it on Facebook day in, day out. The person running this operation was Julian Gallo, who subsequently became the person in charge of Mauricio Macri's social media strategy when he became president, but was my first contact when I started doing research in newsrooms in 1996. He was at the time a graphic designer working for Diario Clarín in their online presence. Julian and I met there. I ended up not doing research for my book for digitizing the news on that, but he and I have become friends since, and we traded a lot of ideas and information. And what Julian details here in this article, and he also told me, is that essentially, if I can scroll down, this is Mauricio Macri. This is Macri. There should be a graph here that is very interesting. So at the time, Macri gets elected, he has this campaign of one household per day, right? Led him to have the highest number of likes of any political leader in the world, surpassing Barack Obama and Angela Merkel. Again, I am like a common person. I go to your house, I eat your food, and I put it on social media. At the beginning, they had to get invited, then people started to request access to that. And they did that thinking, it should be a very interesting piece of evidence here. This was the think piece. This is the media landscape as they saw it in 2013, with social media in the center radiating to traditional media and to WhatsApp and the messaging service. So it was very interesting. It's not the direct answer to the question, but it is a tie-in to his question. These technologies, these social media platforms, despite the dystopic discourse that dominates the media and a lot of the scholarship today, and sometimes a lot of the discourse of our elected officials, are seen by the population as much more reticular and horizontal ways of communication, right? And therefore, if you put this front and center and you radiate from that, right, you can build a public image and you can build a strategic communication campaign, not on the basis, right, of the expert as influencers or opinion leaders, as per Keith's question, but as the other people in your social network, classic, network theory, right, building from the ground up. You connect with others, they connect, they amplify until you become the person, the political leader with the highest number of likes per capita on earth. Right? Spending, they claim, who knows, a fifth in their political campaign than their opponents. Right? Who knows for other reasons, not necessarily for this, but the 2015 Argentine election in Argentina is very, very interesting. I'll give you one more data point, because Julian is a friend of mine. When Barack Obama visited Macri at the tail end of his presidency in the spring, Northern Hemisphere spring of 2016, Julian decided that the only communication out of our pink house, we have a pink house rather than a white house, we are a much more interesting country, out of the pink house would be on freaking Snapchat. So they essentially had 6 staffers, if I remember correctly, each of them with a cell phone, following from the president's office, right? Barack Obama and his family and their officials as they were in different parts of Buenos Aires. You are in the press, you wanted access to Barack Obama's visit to Argentina, Snapchat. Why Snapchat? Because that's where the young vote is. Now, the president of Argentina, you imagine a 50-year-old eminent political journalist, no idea what Snapchat is. I can't still use Snapchat. I mean, it's foreign to me. But that drew the press bananas. There were all kinds of editorials about withholding information, favoring foreign interests, etc. But what they were protesting in a classic Andy Abbott, account is the jurisdictional loss of power. So, we are not, opinion leaders anymore, right? I mean, 6 people, 6 young people with phones and cameras, they are disintermediating me, and that was it, right? So, there are lots of, I feel, and Magdalena Wojcicka and I were talking about this. She has some research that shows, she calls it the other 97%. And essentially, 97% don't care about it. Right? So we as a field have developed theories and assumptions that apply to us and apply to journalists, because journalists love the media even more than we do. In an environment with what Marcus Pryor calls low choice, where we had no other choice than to go to a handful of sites, we were forced to like it. Not necessarily to love it, because love is something that comes bottom up, but to like the media environment. Now we are not forced to like anymore, and we show that we don't really love. And so do the concepts that we have really apply, and to what extent? That needs to become an empirical question. It has to be the end of the paper. It cannot be the beginning of the paper justifying the account.
Pablo, thank you very much. And unfortunately, we're over time, and so I'm so sorry. We're happy to have you speak longer, but I think Andrés, I have to let everyone go. So, thank you very much, Pablo.
My pleasure. Thank you.